All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Blowback Roundtable, episode 49. Thank you so much for joining us today. Big news of the day is the ICJ just issued a ruling in the criminal case brought by South Africa about the genocide in Gaza, and it was before we get into that, let me thank Ian Kummer for joining us right here. He's in the Moscow suburbs. Ben Toth from Page Hungry, my co-host, and John Steppling, expat living in Norway, playwright and political activist. So thank you guys.
First time, at least geographically, there's three of us in Europe, by the way, and you're the minority. That doesn't usually happen.
Is it 6 o'clock in Hungary, 6 o'clock in Norway, and 8 p.m. in Moscow?
It's 8 p.m. It's 8 p.m.
So, so that was the big news. This ruling. So it was kind of a mixed ruling because they did not declare an immediate ceasefire. They declared that there was enough evidence to continue an investigation, and the case wasn't thrown out as Israel was asking. So it's a mixed ruling, and deliberations. The case will continue for who knows how long. But I don't know to be excited or not to be excited. Ben, you're a little bit excited. That's good.
I am. I mean, for me, this is unprecedented. I mean, if the West could have stopped this from happening, it would have happened. And most of the rulings, I mean, I'm just going to list them. These are recommendations, not so binding, but Israel must take all measures to prevent genocide, ensure that none of its military commits it, prevent and punish incitement to genocide. That means these public pronunciations that, the IDF spokesperson and people like that have been saying. Take measures to provide humanitarian aid, preserve evidence of already alleged genocide, and then in 1 month they must submit a report to the court of the measurements they've taken to this effect. And to me, it's huge. That's why I prepared this artwork that you can put on screen. It's a mixture of two really nice AI-generated artworks. I've seen huge celebrations in Yemen, obviously South Africa. Sometimes the small countries must jump in. Because the name, as I think, not reputation, but the name, this sort of famed, the only democracy in the Middle East, the righteous army has been, I think, defeated in the world, in the minds of the world. Even if it's non-binding, even if there's no ceasefire, this can open the way to new lawsuits, including the sponsors. So believe me, this does not sit well with Macron, with Scholz, with Brown Blair. I think John has another name for him, Rishi Sunak, and these unquestioning sponsors of everything Israel does. And the title of the show comes from maybe an hour or 2 hours after the ruling. Ben Gvir already gave his pronunciations and the Times of Israel saying this is an anti-Semitic ruling and we are not. So there's a negative side. We don't even have to follow the guidelines. Obviously, they're not going to, and that's the sad side of the news. But I think this will be recorded in future history as a big milestone.
Well, the problem is that, submit a report in a month, and there might not be a Gaza to report on in a month. Right. These types of investigations take years, so it's unfortunately not going to be too helpful for what's going on.
And it's kind of like,
when Russia's involved, the judgments are pretty quick without much deliberation at all. But yeah, when it's Israel, it's going to drag on and drag on. It shows the hypocrisy.
There was some special forces, I don't know if it was Australia or US, and saying we're going to check ourselves whether we committed some bad things or not. And then they returned half a year saying we checked and we found nothing. It could be something like that because it's left to them. But still, I think it's a milestone. John has, I think, rather mixed feelings. By the way, John just got this news, so he didn't quite follow the things. What do you think, just straight off the bat?
Well, I was out all day. I had a very long drive, as I tend to every other Friday. So it's like a 4-hour drive, and I was out most of the day. And I'm kind of recovering from this terrifying flu that I got. But it's not it raises so many questions about international criminal courts in general. I mean, this goes back to The Hague, to the Milosevic trial. It goes to Arusha. And
can I add something that we learned last time when we spoke with Dimitri Laskaris? He taught us that the ICC, what was made to punish Milosevic, is basically sort of a private entity, whereas this is the ICJ. This is built to uphold the UN laws. We learned that they were different.
Yeah, the court that was invented out of whole cloth by the United States, funded by the United States, the one that tried the Milosevic case, was just a star chamber. I mean, it was just a kangaroo court. I've written articles on this, by the way, that can probably still be found online. Chris Black was one of the lawyers. Tiffany Dixon was one of the lawyers. I was part of the artists' call to defend Milosevic, along with, I think I've mentioned this, Peter Hanke, Harold Pinter. So it was, it was a notable group defending Milosevic, and it was a ludicrous, it was a ludicrous court. And at a certain point, when the case was going very badly, they simply shut Milosevic up and appointed an attorney that he didn't want, who had previously just been working for the state. And so the whole thing was just a debacle, a shambles of what once might have been law. But it raises these questions. Even the supposed more credible ICJ, there are all these issues, and this will segue into other things that I want to raise, and we were talking about before offline. Because what happens now? We know Israel's not going to stop. They've already shown complete contempt for international law. There were already, ample documentation provided to various places that, this was a genocide, that these were war crimes, withholding water and food and relief, healthcare products of any sort, and all of it. You're shutting it all off. This is a war crime. There were children being operated on without anesthetic. This is a war crime. And none of it mattered. Israel did nothing except continue doing what it had been doing from the beginning, because there's no teeth to any of these judgments or edicts or pronouncements. And what is the ICJ going to do? Well, nothing, because there's no mechanism by which Israel can be made to stop. It's not like, okay, you're committing genocide. We've decided that. Now we pack up and go home. Netanyahu was already telling them to fuck right off. They're going to continue going on. The nutcase settlers. There was a video that went everywhere, viral, the other day.
Stopping the aid convoys, right?
Blocking the aid shipments at the border from reaching the Palestinians, and laughing and chanting death to Arabs and so forth.
Proudly with the Israeli flag.
With the Israeli flag. And these are like 15-year-old, 16-year-old little Nazis. So what does one do with this? I'm happy as, happy as a pig in shit that this ruling happened. It's better than it not happening. I think it was a meticulously presented case. South Africa deserves nothing but fulsome praise and support for what they did and will continue to do, and there's going to be civil cases, and yes, so maybe this extrapolates outward into other things, but one is still faced with the fact that the Zionist strategy since before 1948 even has been to simply ignore criticism and to tell people to fuck off and to simply do what they wanted to do. That has always been the case. And it's interesting. I was thinking today, for some reason, on this long drive, that what the U.S. government did to the indigenous tribes in the United States, the genocide of 600 tribes, is actually very close to what Israel is doing to Palestinians. I mean, they're left at the end with, a few Palestinians on reservations here and there, Bantustans and little fragmented shadow existence versions of what was once this extraordinary culture and society. And that's what they're aiming to do. That's the goal. And I don't think they're going to stop. And that's why I think Yemen looms as even more significant than the ICJ, because Yemen is costing Israel money. It's costing the United States money. And apparently the rumors are that Biden went to the Chinese, sent
Sullivan, I think,
to ask for help resolving the Yemen problem, and China laughed apparently and said,
"Wouldn't you?"
Yeah, nothing to do.
A month ago, they were threatening, we have to stop the growth of China, so please spare us the missiles that we're going to use against you very soon. We need these missiles. That's what it equates to.
I don't know. I'm processing. You're right. I'm processing as we do this, but I think that the idea of international law is dubious. What does it mean at this point?
So, okay. So, as you're processing, I'm processing too, and I'm, trying to, come up with an articulation of kind of the trend that's taking place. And I mean, the best that I can come up with is that, we're seeing a movement away from the pretense of a rules-based order. So the West is going to be less and less concerned with pretending that this order that's been in place for the past 75 years has some legitimacy, has some rules to it. And so they don't really care that the systems that they put in place and that they've been manipulating, for the past 75 years are being used against them, because they're moving away from that system and they're moving towards a might makes right, law of the jungle kind of system that is going to be, what they plan on engaging in. And, that's the system of the future. And so they don't really care that these prior systems that they have, developed and put in place are being used against them, because pretty soon none of that's going to matter, is kind of my thinking. And so, there's some events coming up that are just going to render the old order obsolete, and it's going to be law of the jungle might makes right. So I don't know. That was what was coming to my mind. Is that anybody?
I understand, and I also understand the the pessimism that this won't stop the bloodshed immediately. Of course, it won't. It has no teeth. But I think they care. There was two pieces of one. I'll get to a little Russian perspective, which was amazing. But there was also in parallel, like a couple of days ago, there was this annual hearing on the human rights record of China at the UN, and there was these big headlines like something like the human rights view puts the global divide on display. Israel was there criticizing China for the Xinjiang Uyghurs, and all of the Arab countries said, we do not see any of these violations, and they were there to rip, Israel a new one. Already the narrative fell apart. I think they like to genocide, coup whoever they want, and call it democracy, call it freedom, human rights, like killing terrorists or whatever they want. And that effect, that they can't just say that and everybody will believe it, is a huge loss, I think, in soft power. And that brings me to the Russian article I read from some Russian thinker. I apologize, I don't remember, in the New Eastern Outlook journal. Really good place to be. Also, when you go to it from Hungary, it says this: you are going to an unsafe place on the internet. So obviously censored in our neighborhood. But it says this ruling doesn't just negate the current mythos of America, the democracy, the human rights champion, but history. They're like everything they spun since World War II, maybe before it, bit by bit. These can be open to erosion. I think Bashar al-Assad of Syria said, well, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, which is terrible, but 23 million Russians, Soviets, Romani people, people with limitations, I'm forgetting the word, but anyway.
Handicapped, yes.
Handicapped people,
Capable.
And why is one group held up as the oppressed from that era, who is now committing a genocide? And all of this is getting unearthed and questioned in surprising places. And I think a loss in PR, if they didn't care about PR, they wouldn't spend all that money, all that shit, everything you see on mainstream media and in written news to sway your mind. And losing that, I think it's got them in a panic. That's my opinion. And that is good news.
Well, it's generational. I think support for Israel is still extremely strong, but it's also extremely generational. So TikTok put out a statement recently saying, because there were accusations that TikTok was promoting a pro-Palestinian narrative, and TikTok just said no. It's just younger Americans don't like say support Palestine. So I think so. You're 20-year-olds now. You're college age, university age people now in the USA and Western countries are going to be lawmakers within the next 20 years, and the people who are lawmakers now are going to be retired or dead. It seems like the only way to retire these days. Seems like no one actually retires from politics. So it's long term. It doesn't look good.
I was going to say, when you said generational, you mean America. I think you mean America, because that's where
I would say Western Europe too. I mean, it's just
Western Europe. Even though there's all sorts of farmer uprising, there's all sorts of Palestine flags, like pretty much every night. That's why some heads of state, even Belgium recently had to say, we want a two-state solution. We do not support this. I mean, a lot of people had to backtrack, as opposed to America. America, I think, is still the lowest support for Palestine, and even there it's growing, but it's like the low 20s. I can't remember off the top of my head. Much higher in Europe, and of course the global south, the entire global south, including China, including Russia. Yeah,
USA is the extreme. USA went from being Israel's strongest supporter to being its least in opposition. There's a shift.
Yeah.
So yes. But I'd say ultimately, when it comes to the Palestinian issue, what matters the most now is not any court rulings. It's how Palestinians themselves are doing in Gaza. And we're more than 3 months into 3.5 months into this, and
a million of them are starving, unfortunately.
Well, yes, the humanitarian cost has been astonishing, but the IDF is not. Imagine. 3 months, more than 3 months, 3.5 months, and there's very little military progress. That's I would call it embarrassing. I can't think of a more polite word than embarrassing.
True. There was a U.S. 25,000 people are dead, but some U.S. military, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, something like that, summarized that maybe we destroyed 20 to 25% of the fighting capacity of Hamas, which is an utter military failure, especially considering so many people are dead. So yeah, they have failed. And Ansar Allah, the Houthis, they don't show any signs of stopping. But do you want to know something from America that it infuriated me? Not just sending weapons, which we'll get to, but what they're doing now is probing the the UN Relief,
General.
RWA, Relief
Yeah.
Work Association, for the October 7 involvement, and they're freezing US funding to it. So yeah, they're still wedded absolutely to Israel, but most of the world, I think, isn't. I mean, they say, yes, this has to be taken seriously. We have to get aid. But something that went from the N12 Israeli channel to the cradle in the middle of this, which is amazing. What they secured is a US arms deal with 25, that's a squadron of F-35, the latest Chinese, a squadron of F-15s, 12 Apache helicopter, and, in quotes, many thousands of armaments in the coming days. That's the answer from the US.
Well, okay, I'm processing. So I have a couple of thoughts,
Go, John.
or questions, perhaps. Yeah, the IDF is not a real army. It's not a legitimate army, and it flies American armaments in American planes with mostly American trained pilots, Israeli pilots, and they drop tons of bombs, and they're very effective doing that. They drop them on hospitals and mosques and anywhere else. And part of the reason for this indiscriminate, carpet bombing of this tiny patch of land is because they could not and continue to be unable to make any kind of headway on the ground. They're also suffering significant fatalities. The IDF has lost a lot of soldiers, and everyone has seen the video of the guys wrapping the explosive devices for the demolition of the housing of already abandoned Palestinian homes, and they're joking, and it's a TikTok video. And apparently a Hamas fighter hit that group with an RPG. Moments later, one killed all 21 of the IDF soldiers.
And they woke up to the headlines were a day of mourning, the saddest day in Israel's history, something like that, the greatest loss.
So, and this is something that Miko Peled predicted. It's something that what's his name, Shiri Bolson predicted. It's something Ilan Pappy predicted. That this is a shit army. It's a TikTok army. It's not the army of 1967. It's not Moshe Dayan and these hard ass generals that were actual soldiers. That generation is gone. They're in nursing homes, and so they are more dependent on U.S. assistance and funding and military supplies than they have ever been. But this raises another question that I think often people don't understand somehow, and this is that 13 of the 19 cabinet members of Biden's administration have dual citizenship, right? They're Israeli, they carry Israeli passports and American passports, US passports. Israel's not exactly a real country. It's a garrison state put together by the US government, funded, and if the US for some bizarre reason withdrew funding, there is no tax base for Israel to survive and pay its own bills, and it would just crumble. And they're also losing the demographic war in that region significantly. So on one level, you could look at Israel and say, well, its days are numbered anyway. It's simply a project begun in 1948, pushed through by two rabid anti-Semites in Great Britain, and Lord Rothschild, and it was going to serve as an outpost for Western business interests and to protect Western business interests in a hostile Muslim world, and especially it was going to help protect Aramco and Standard Oil and Rockefeller and the Saudis were picked out of, thin air because they were Wahhabi nutters and they ergo easier to control and unlikely to suffer, mush-brained bouts of democratic enthusiasm. They didn't want that. They got who they wanted, and they lent Ibn Saud, a whole lot of money, and that story is well documented. Okay. The Arab ruling class in the Middle East has always been bought off by the West. It's in cahoots with the West. They have, business interests in common. They have long-range goals in common. And the only outlier to this is Iran. All the Gulf states, all the Gulf state monarchies, Saudi Arabia in particular, and of course Israel, all work together. They always have worked together. Nobody, Saudi princes always go to Israeli hospitals for their operations, and so everybody knows all this. So the rest of it's like a dog and pony show. It's just theater. But Iran stands as this problem. And it's why Israel, especially the settlers, because they're so extreme, have always had this hard on for Iran. We want to somehow, find the catalyst that would trigger an open hot war, including the use of nuclear weapons against Tehran. That's been the goal for a long time. And I think the saner minds at the Pentagon and State Department know this is a terrible idea and that the U.S. can't win that war. It's another war the United States can't win. And it's certainly a war that Israel can't win. But this is one of the strange bits of like cognitive dissonance in this whole thing, because you hear Ben-Gvir and these people talking about, greater Israel. We need to strike Iran now. That's always been the goal. We're going to expand everywhere, take over Jordan, take over Lebanon. And they can't do it. I mean, unless they really have some fantasy that they're going to fly jets out of bases in Israel with nuclear weapons on them, and Iran's going to let them do that. This is just part of the surreal aspect of this whole question. So, to me, the bigger question regarding all of this, the ICJ findings and so forth, is that the West in general, and this includes the fear mongering that is now growing across Europe, calls for World War III, so forth. All of this, the NATO, inclusion of Sweden and Finland and all these places into NATO, that and the continued conflict with Zelensky in Ukraine. The bigger question is that there is a large political crisis in the West, I think. And we are really seeing the Western institutions of rule and law starting to crumble, and nothing speaks to this more than the new twink prime minister, 34-year-old boyfriend of Macron, who is now the prime minister, or Chaiwala, who is now the prime minister in England. There's no elections. There's no mandate. There's no credibility. There's just you appoint your friends and line up for the bunga bunga party at Davos with, it's not the same without Silvio, but still, that's what's going on. Sorry, kids are ringing. the hookers were all sold out in spite of 1,000% price.
Yeah, I read that too.
Davos, by the way. But but the point being that all of this illegitimacy, all of this just increasingly bizarre behavior, is speaks to this crisis, in my humble opinion. That's
So
the end of my rant for right
you've taken us around the globe, from Sweden, Europe, Zelensky's little place, back to the Middle East. Can you wrap? I mean, this crisis of legitimacy, I think military and soft power. I mean, where do you think it will take us?
Well, look at the coming election in the U.S.
Those guys would know more about that. I haven't really.
Biden and Trump. I mean, nothing says crisis as much as those two words together. Biden, Trump.
That's a fair point.
Well, we have the New Hampshire primary that just happened.
Yeah. I mean, Trump didn't just win; he won huge, right? He won huge.
Even though apparently a lot of Democrats voted Nikki Haley, like not registered, Republicans, in the Republican primary just to get her in, and it didn't work.
Yeah, so some states, and I think there requires some explanation for people not in the USA, so some states have different rules. So some require you to vote for the party registered in the general election. So you don't want to switch parties just for the primary because that'll lock you out of voting for your own candidate. But New Hampshire is not one of those states, so you can vote.
Right.
So you could have Democrats vote for the Republican candidate and still vote for their guy, Biden, in the general election. So that's what happened there. So I think it's safe to say that Trump's going to get the nomination at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine short of a bullet in the head, and maybe even then, he will get the nomination. Because after all, what difference?
Maybe even then, I like that.
Yeah. No, look, the caucuses are a bit of a hand job, which is a really good metaphor for the caucuses, actually. Anyway, and South Carolina will be a sort of watershed moment, and Trump will sweep it. And the best you can come up with is Nikki Haley. Anyway, guys, I mean, she's a cretin. That's the other thing. I've never seen in public such nakedly, visibly stupid people in positions.
Do you know Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of Germany?
Yeah,
it's like you have your own Baerbock now in the US.
Yeah. No, but the foreign minister in Sweden and the guy who was the defense minister. I mean, just shockingly dumb, these people, and it every time I see one of these stage chat opportunities, photo ops from Davos or the World Economic Forum, and I see some talking head chatting to somebody about, well, drinking coffee is bad for the environment. We have to end. I thought, torn from my dead, frozen fingers.
I think you tweeted that. It was a great tweet.
Yeah, I mean, but it's one absurdity after another. But now we are seeing, and by the way, the front runner to replace Stoltenberg as head of NATO, Mark Rutte of the Netherlands.
Have you read the expose? There was this leak in Dutch, so I have a machine translated version of it. Apparently, there's a leak of a phone call where he called the foreign ministry saying, how can we make it look like Israel is not committing a war crime? And this got published like in mainstream Dutch press, which I would think he's in the deep shitter. But I think that makes him even more qualified for NATO.
Yeah.
In a sad way.
Look, Stoltenberg is. There was actually a news program here in Norway, a surprisingly unusually critical, half comedic news show making fun of Stoltenberg the other night, and that's not ever happened before. Because he's such a conniving little weasel, and all his people have got anyway. But the point being that Mark Rutte is a deeply unpleasant human being, and he had to resign in the Netherlands as prime minister because of the farmer protests. And we should mention the farmer protests in Germany, in France, in Scotland, in Ireland, in Slovakia, I believe. All these are big protests. People are not ready to eat 3D printed meat, and so all of these pronouncements coming out of Davos, all the speeches by Al Gore, Jesus Christ, Al Gore, and Kerry, and whoever is the latest, Yuval Harari, all of these morons, Jordan Peterson. This is it somehow feels increasingly unconvincing, even to those prone to want to believe it, I think. But
definitely in Europe, definitely.
My prognostications are often wrong about public stupidity. So
I wouldn't say so. I don't know if you guys want to jump in. I just don't want to monopolize, John.
No,
Well,
I
I wanted to go back to Israel for 1 second. And I was gonna ask Ian, I mean, what his thoughts are of the significance of this most recent, very large weapons shipment, which Ben did talk about earlier. Some Apaches, some F-16s,
and F-35s, the high-tech pricey.
What's the significance? Like, what is that? What can we infer from that? What are the plans? Like, bolstering Israel's military, I mean, suggests that, they're looking for a widening and escalation of the war, or is it just, preventative measures? What's your thought, Ian?
Well, I don't think anyone is looking for widening the conflict. I'm sure they would like to avoid widening the conflict at all costs. It's probably more of a one to be put to use in the current conflict zone. If they, it might be deterrence, just bolstering Israel's conventional capabilities in general. It does seem like the IDF is pretty fixated on leveling southern Lebanon, so that might be put to good use there. So I would say it's this weapons shipment by itself without context doesn't necessarily mean anyone. It could be all of the above, essentially.
I was going to add at the same time that if you believe that it was in person, I don't know, but if you believe the New York Times, then they're out of money for Ukraine. Well, I think this is worth quite a few $1 million, this shipment, which just got approved, I suppose, to Israel to do with it as they please. Very interesting. I mean, they're going on all fronts. If you just the exclamation of Israeli leaders, they want to go into southern Lebanon, which would be at all-out war with Hezbollah. They want to take something called the Philadelphia Corridor, which would be war with Egypt. And the U.S. seems incapable of stopping them. Dusty's here with us. Hey, hello.
I wanted to one last thing on Israel. I mean, I'm reminded of, we had Vladimir Goldstein on the other day, and he was kind of advocating that to solve this solution, we have to understand the mindset of the Israeli population, and we have to understand the mindset of Zionism. We have to understand that rulings like this at the ICJ simply reinforce the belief and the certainty that the Zionists have that humanity is anti-Semitic.
Everybody is out to get them. Yes.
So,
yeah.
I mean, to me, I think that's a very interesting statement, and it's a very interesting suggestion, and an advocacy that we really need to take that into consideration. I mean, to me, I didn't say it at the time, but subsequently thinking about it, I'm reminded, like, should the West have taken the Nazi mentality into consideration and worked with it and understood that to them, they're more, they're a superior, breed of human, and they don't want to be living with these less than folks. And I mean, we have to respect that, right? We have to take it into consideration.
Well, it's a little different with the I would say that with Germany in World War II, because it was pretty clear early on that Hitler, H-man himself, was trying to resolve the Western Front. He was trying to, because with the Battle of Britain, he was trying to use the carrot and stick diplomacy method to force a peace treaty or a ceasefire or something. I mean, he was trying to do that all the way through 1944. It was just at that point he was considered untrustworthy. No one was going to negotiate with him. He was trying to end that two-front war so he could focus on the Eastern Front, focus on the Soviet Union. That's what he was trying to do from the beginning, but just no one gave him a break. That's how I would interpret it.
Well, it reminds me of Ukraine, by the way. Sorry,
yes.
But yeah, the Soviets didn't send, I guess, psychologists to consider his mental well-being in 1945 in its budget. Go ahead, John.
No, I think that I think that's not quite correct. If I may disagree with Vladimir, who I like a lot, the Zionist. I mean, I've written about this recently. Feel free to read my blog, everyone.
Link will be in the comment section.
The Herzl, came out of that fin de Siècle, Vienna that included. I mean, he lived in the same city as Freud, Hitler, Thomas Mann, Mahler, Jung. I mean, there's an extraordinary density of.
I think Lenin too.
And extraordinary. There were the majority of Jews in Austria, in Germany, in Europe, probably, if you were to take a poll, didn't like the idea of Herzl's nationalism. He was an ultra-nationalist sort of fanatic, and this project gained traction because Great Britain saw it as a rum idea that sort of killed two birds with one stone. Or something. My point is that when the Balfour Declaration was signed, and then when they decided, okay, the first wave goes over, and then the second wave of, comes over in 1948, the main one, and then the Stern Gang and the Haganah, terrorist groups start slaughtering Palestinians from day one, literally. There were countless letters written by Western Jews to the U.S. government, to the British government, to newspapers saying this is a very dangerous precedent, and you can't displace people and not expect long-term repercussions to haunt the whole thing, and they're going to come back and bite you eventually. So it had political backing. The sort of first wave of Zionist non-farmers who went over to try to learn to be farmers, and they worked with Arabs, and then they kicked them to the curb. These people were killers, and they've talked about the number of Arabs they killed and so forth, and Palestinians they were already driving off the land and so forth. My point is, nobody believed in the theoretical, moral, anything to do with Zionism. It was a political expediency. That's all. It wasn't, we are the chosen people and this is King David's, and this is all horseshit that nobody except maybe Ben Gvir's wife believes. And, the rest of it is, this was a political choice and a political decision, and it was ruthless. And these people were killers, and they went and they were colonialists, and they were no different than the German colonizers in German West Africa. They were no different than Manifest Destiny in the United States. They were no different than anywhere else, and that's all. There's no psychological secret attached to this. I don't think it's now the question. This is not to say that the question of anti-Semitism is not important, or that anti-Semitism doesn't exist, because it does. And the great kind of historical irony now is that the 21st century Jew is the Palestinian. But you have to understand the structural dynamics of what anti-Semitism really is, which I've written about too, but other people have written extraordinarily better and more exhaustive pieces than I have. But I did a piece for Counterpunch, in fact, called the Anti-Imperialism of Fools. And you can find it at Counterpunch, about historical anti-Semitism and its relationship. And the third thing I just want to throw in, because I feel like I'm going on a lot here, is one should remember the Dulles brothers and the rat lines for Nazis that they got out of Germany at the end of World War II, because the Dulles brothers liked Nazis. It wasn't that, oh, well, we need their science. No, they liked them. That's who they'd rather be doing business with than those, nasty Bolsheviks and scary Stalinists. And so they restocked Western, North American, and European business and cultural institutions with barely rehabilitated Nazis after World War II. And you can read Operation Paperclip. Annie Jacobson's book is great on that. But my point is that I don't think Zionists give a rat's ass that this is political. It's not anything else. It's not moral, religious, or
they have Talmudic logic, to escape any sort of responsibility. Tomorrow is going to be the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which obviously Russia will not be invited again. I think the Red Army is the one that, but it's a good
liberated the camp. Yes, good moment to remember. But I think the steel was American, the engine, the locomotive taking prisoners to Auschwitz was American, and the fuel was American. So just something to remember when it comes to this. So there was a lot there. I wonder, I have things I'm thinking about. What about you guys? There's some big things in the news. There was the plane crash.
Talking about war crimes, shall we go over to Russia, your territory?
Sure. So there's that big plane crash. What was it, Monday?
Plane crash.
Yes.
I think it was as we were doing our show on Tuesday. That was the Ilyushin 76.
Yes, so 3 days ago. And that happened around 11:15 in the morning, local time in Belgorod. So there is an airfield there. And so apparently this plane was coming in it was a Moscow to Belgorod flight. And the crash was caught on video because there was a loud bang preceding it, which of course provoked people into filming it. What's going on? And the plane crash itself was actually caught on video. And immediately there were some Ukrainian media outlets that posted, it was our guys that did it. It was another victory for Ukraine. And then after that, Russia posted that this was a plane ferrying POWs, Ukrainian POWs, for an upcoming prisoner exchange. And so those news outlets did retract that earlier statement. Now, that said, I don't interpret that as an admission of guilt. However, and the reason I say that is because these Ukrainian and pro-Ukrainian outlets, they don't have access to Ukrainian MOD. They don't have access to Russian MOD. They just see something explode. They see something blow up and they say, "Oh, that was our guys." Doesn't even matter where it was.
Yeah.
And like Spanish Favs just said here, that's part of the Belgrade falls under that restricted airspace. So all civilian flights closed off. Now, if it's military, can still obviously operate aircraft in the restricted space, but it's unlikely they would send a transport plane to Belgrade because of the obvious threat of Ukrainian air defense.
The Russian MOD, however, released that this was scheduled. It was all parties, including Ukraine. Sorry, one more thing. A Ukrainian ex-POW said this was one of 5 recent, this plane has been circling around this place for all the time. This is how I got home. They put it on his Telegram. Go
yes.
ahead,
so this is with the caveats that flights with diplomatic protection known to both sides can happen on the pretext that they're not shot down. There's like, hey, this flight is coming out at this time. This is the one that has the POWs on it. And there were apparently in that flight to Belgrade that day, apparently there were allegedly 2 planes. The second one saw that the first one had shot down and changed course and was not hit. So apparently that was not the only plane.
The second one got saved.
That one. Yes. So Margot over at RT News at Russia Today, she released that list of the Ukrainian POWs. Now, some Ukrainian and pro-Ukrainian social media users are claiming that, no, this list is fake because it has prisoners from previous exchanges. Now, I looked into this. I don't see any evidence for their claim. So, I mean, that would be smoking gun evidence that this was a Russian fake. And it would, of course, be repeated by mainstream news outlets if it was a smoking gun. But as far as I know, they just made that up because I could find no evidence that those names. And some people on like Quora and some other platforms did name, oh, this guy was exchanged already. But I could find no evidence of that. So as far as I know, that's copium. That's
Have you seen the Ultra Copium yet, which came out from the Kiev Independent? It said the Russians were using POWs as human shields.
It's human shields for the S3. Well, and the problem with that is that
S-300
S-300s are an explosive hazard. So they're not. There's something even in peacetime you want to avoid transporting by air to begin with. Not to say militaries never use air transport for ammunition, but it's not something that's safe to transport by air to begin with. And there's easier. There's rail lines. There are easier and safer ways without getting shot down to bring. So it's overall ridiculous. So at this point, and it's interesting because it's been more, I'd say about more than 36 hours at this point since we got a major update on the story. There were photos of the crash site. So I'm thinking, and if this, remember the S-300 incident in Poland, we were hearing about that for the better part of a week. Just constant updates on it, and there's just nothing on this one, which makes me think
probably real. Yeah.
Yes.
Vladimir Putin just in the afternoon hours, I saw him say that we got the black boxes. They're in a laboratory. We'll know more in the next couple of days.
Yes. So at this point, I'm thinking it is a real incident. And I also have to point out that the reason that Ukrainian prisoners are kept at facilities far away from the front to begin with is because there was that HIMARS incident in July of 2022. And
I remember, but yeah, describe.
And what's interesting, there were Azov battalion prisoners in that flight roster. Yeah. So they're allergic to, they have a tendency to die. They do, so I've noticed that, and it kind of makes me think, well, is there something going on within the Ukrainian government itself? They just don't want these guys to come back? Because, Azov battalion still exists, and as far as I can tell, it was just rebuilt. So it's just, if most of those guys died or were captured in Mariupol, and now it's just Zelensky made it, this iconic unit representing Ukrainian freedom, you're just not like these guys coming back alive. It's possible.
So there might be a political faction within the Kiev government that was not for the prisoner swap, and maybe they were responsible deliberately for derailing, so to speak, the prisoner swap.
Can I add to that the initial reports were probably Patriot or IRIS-T, a German or a US air
Yes.
defense, and we all know those aren't manned by Ukrainians. And since the beginning of the war, they said, well, we have to sign off on every target, meaning the US. But I love the French connection, because within 3 hours, the Russian MOD said we destroyed an SAMPT French, air defense system very close to that border. And they don't usually come that close. They have like a range of 100 kilometers. They're usually way in the back. And the French have a huge grudge against Russia, not just because of, the dead mercenaries in Kharkov, but also booting them out of Africa. And I'm sort of loving, there's this theme in Europe that if the Americans actually retreat from here, despite the huge NATO things, we're going to revert to old shit. And the French are picking on the Brits are picking on the Germans. They apparently did this huge short bet in a hedge fund manager against the greatest German companies, betting they would fail, which includes Siemens, Volkswagen, Deutsche Bank. The French are at each other's throats with the British. It's lovely to see the disarray coming from all this. But the French connection, what I thought interesting, because the French also had the presidency of the UN Security Council. And right then, on Tuesday, Lavrov is in New York still, said, we want an extraordinary security session for this. And the French delayed it for a whole goddamn day for Kiev and for everybody to get their story straight, which I thought was significant.
So
know these things.
So it seems like the majority, there were some disagreements on if it was a Patriot or an IRIS-T. Now I did look up the munitions. So the IRIS-T is typically shorter range than the Patriot. However, their most recent munition for the long range interceptor missiles for the IRIS-T do have the range to reach out. So it could be a German system, but it could also, the Patriot PAC-2 interceptors do have the range to reach out from Kharkov to Belgorod airfield.
Oh, by the way, the US washed its hands. The State Department spokesperson, Mr. Vedant Patel, said the US had nothing to do with this. Just so you know, sorry.
And the best time to shoot down a plane is when it's taking off or when it's landing. So it's when it's going the slowest and it's the lowest altitude. That's the best time to shoot down a plane. So this incident is, checks all the boxes for being downed by air defenses. And it's a transport plane. It's not a stealth fighter. It's not a 5th generation stealth fighter. It's a slow, non-stealthy target that's very easy to shoot down, even for missiles that are not exactly intended for aircraft. It's an
between
easy target.
Accidental shoot down by Kiev or deliberate shoot down by Kiev. What do you think, Ian?
Well, so that is the other question, because it could have been an accidental shoot down. We can't die. It's possible that either side did an accidental shoot down. Friendly fire does happen, so we can't sit there and say it's impossible, right? It would just be dishonest. However, I think when you have a scheduled flight that's known to both sides, an accidental, and that flight path, the time it's coming in, you've had multiple, 3 days out. So they had this notification, 3 days, this plane.
And there were three
interceptor
missiles. So it wasn't just one.
Yes. So it seems extremely unlikely that it was an accidental shoot down at this point. And, it's the usual story. Well, the Russians shot down their own aircraft or bombed their own building, or, they trot out that story every time. That doesn't make any sense. Why? It doesn't make sense. But I do think, it's relevant in the news right now that Ukrainian aid is still up in the air at U.S. Congress. So there's talks that within the next, week, I guess, 5 to 7 business days, they will have a new spending bill because they're completely out of money, supposedly. Yeah. And so and Donald Trump is accused of just telling Republicans do not support this bill because it is not good enough for so basically I would sum it up as Republicans are using Ukraine as a bartering chip for what they want on stricter American border control.
Yeah. That'll never.
And Trump is telling them this is not good enough. Don't support it. So we'll see what happens with that. And so this might just be even aside from all the conspiracy theories about Zelensky not liking Azov or Ukrainian faction not liking somebody or not wanting a prison exchange, which is all possible. It's also possible that this is just a drowning man just desperation, trying to get into the news by any means necessary.
That's the closest thing I think I can.
Yes.
John, that kind of brings us into the brewing civil war in Texas.
Oh, that's your guys' topic.
Did you want to discuss that, or?
Well, I mean, this. I'm not sure what to say about it. It is. I guess this officially launches the election cycle in a sense, because it's this cuckoo story. All of this, I mean, this is the problem. We would have to devote, I think, an entire couple hours to unpacking the propaganda from both sides regarding Trump, the border, the supposed assault on the Capitol, all of the great hysterical fears of the Democratic Party and the educated white bourgeoisie in the U.S. and this terror they have of Trump. It's hard to, if you're not an American, if you've not lived in the U.S., it's hard to explain to people.
Yeah, I don't get any of this.
The silliness of all of this, but that in fact there are lots of people out there who believe all of it with a great deal of verve and passion. I don't know what to say about it. It's crazy, and I'm not sure. It's political theater. It is that time of the, there's a presidential election coming. People are winning points or trying to position themselves for future appointments from who they think will win, which is Donald Trump. I honestly can't see Trump not winning this election, short of an assassination or something. Biden can't walk across the stage by himself anymore, so he can't debate. I don't think anybody wants him to. I doubt Donald Trump wants him to debate, because Trump can't debate. It's so nuts. The whole thing is so nuts. And I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop in all of this, that there will be another player to step out of all of this, and take control of the narrative. Because right now the narrative is kind of spinning its wheels, even with this border thing in Texas and Oklahoma and around. I don't personally know anybody who's paying any attention to it. That's the thing, and that probably includes me on one level, because I just think it's all such silliness. But
So just for the viewers, I mean, I'll try and articulate what the issue was. So I guess, the Texas state government put up some razor wire on the border. The federal government ruled that you couldn't do that. And the federal government told the state government to take the razor wire down. The state government's refusing. 25 Republican governors are supporting the state of Texas and saying they have the authority to defend themselves and keep the razor wire up.
Well,
so Ian, does that
just to clarify, they said that federal employees have the right to go in, because right now it's police, and I guess it's mostly National Guard that the state governor called up to guard those border checkpoints.
Help me, I'm European. National Guard answers to the state, right? Not to the U.S. Not to. Well,
yes, so National Guard is the modern equivalent. It's the modern equivalent of a state militia.
Okay, good. So it answers to Texas.
But what's
You have to
interesting about
understand, you have to understand that states' rights is a big thing in the U.S., and that people are very passionate about states' rights. The problem with this particular event, this meme, is is that, Obama built some of the fence. I mean, Democrats have supported the fence and built it. I mean, this has been going on for 25 years. It's a complete dog and pony show, just like the assault on the Capitol was a dog and pony show. That's not an insurrection. I can show you what an insurrection looks. In Bolivia, that the United States launched a fascist attempted coup. People were burned alive on the street. That's an insurrection, not a bunch of crisis actors in horny helmets walking between the lines,
Escorted.
velvet ropes into the Capitol so they could do some sightseeing. It's idiotic. It's stupid. It's just propaganda. It's just spin. It's marketing, and like everything in American politics, it avoids the real issues and the real problems. So,
from the outside looking in, I'm one of those people who reads Mr. Dmitry Medvedev's telegram just for fun, and he's a joker. And he said, "Well, long live the People's Republic of Texas." And there I am, just popcorn. I can't take it seriously. I don't understand it.
yeah, no.
Well, 300,000 in December, 300,000, not 3,000, 300,000 people illegally crossed the border into the USA.
Yeah. It's been going on forever, and that this is nonsensical and that it eats up a lot of media bandwidth, because issues like homelessness, for example, is never touched upon. This is a crisis. This is a serious crisis in the U.S.
Huge spike in the last couple of years.
And nary a word. None of these candidates. Nikki Haley isn't talking about what do we do with people dying of exposure and bubonic plague in these homeless camps across the country. Nobody talks about that. None of the candidates talk about it. I haven't heard one.
And by the way, it's new, relatively new. We can see this in Europe. There's YouTubers who just bicycle through these camps, and we never imagined America looking like this, but we see them one after the other saying, what's going on there?
Yeah, it's staggering. It's staggering.
But the immigration issue is exploited for partisan political purposes, right? So the Republicans, their base has this nativist tendencies, and they don't like the idea of a whole bunch of Americans coming across the border illegally. Whereas the Democrats kind of support it because it's bad for the labor unions. It's bad for organized labor when all these low-wage immigrants, flood the border. And it's also good because they typically will vote Democratic. And so the Democrats think that, that they don't really mind the people coming over. But nobody really, if the Republicans truly opposed it, they could stop destroying those countries where those people are coming from, which would, of course, solve the issue. And since they don't do that, they don't have any intention of doing that. It's a political football that gets tossed back and forth. But yeah, they're not dealing with the real issues.
Look, there's an article in sorry, I'm just quick in the current issue of Covert Action magazine about the U.S. plans to build immediately a number of new very big drone bases in Africa. Yeah,
Blinken is touring friendly African states. Go ahead.
This is where the money goes. This is where the money is made. Destroy places and rebuild places. The pivot to Africa is continuing. Niger, Burkina Faso scared the shit out of the United States the same way that Yemen scares the shit out of them. And they are taking whatever measures they can to offset what they perceive as a very serious threat. And it is a serious threat. This stuff in Texas is just nonsense. I don't think anybody has to pay any attention to it, right? So,
Ian, you were trying to.
I was going to say it's also connected to the fentanyl crisis. Most of the huge opioid crisis in the USA right now, it's actually the leading cause of death for all Americans in the 18 to 49 cohort. Most of it goes over the southern border. And so there's a lot, and just for voters, they're just sitting there, their neighborhoods being just destroyed by cartels. I mean, it's actually, and the cartel problem, like you said, John, is not new. Like, it was crazy. I went to Kuwait, an American base in Kuwait, not even in the USA. And there were Latin America. I think it was MS-13. I don't remember. I'll be honest. I don't remember which gang it was, but it was a Latin American gang. A graffiti on an American base in a different country. It's crazy how
in Kuwait, in the Middle East.
I am dead serious. Yes, in Kuwait.
Yeah,
that's how prolific the immigration crisis has become in the USA.
The drug crisis, you mean? I love that. When Joe Biden retreated from Afghanistan, it's like in a couple of months the whole heroin epidemic went disappeared, and now we have the fentanyl crisis.
I mean that would be my point regarding the drug issue. I mean, the CIA is directly involved in that. The cartels just don't exist. They exist in a symbiotic relationship with U.S. intelligence and the ruling class. I mean, what was that guy that he was shot? He shot himself close to where I live, twice in the head. The reporter that did the
Webb,
Gary Webb.
And the border crisis goes both ways too. It affects both sides because I saw some I don't remember the exact statistic, unfortunately, but something like 2/3 to 3/4 of the guns used by the cartels in Mexico originate from the USA. So it's kind of guns going one direction and drugs and human trafficking. That was Fast and Furious, which was a little bit different, but this is just straight up. This isn't a Fed bust gone bad. This is just straight up prolific arms shipments from the USA to Mexico. And like Spanish Faves just said, yes, I think that's part of it. I mean, it's just when you see these videos on YouTube of just driving through neighborhoods in Philadelphia, Portland, and just seeing people look like zombies because that's how prolific the opioid crisis has gotten.
Yeah. No, it's staggering. It's a staggering crisis. And it's a health and safety crisis because I wasn't joking about the bubonic plague deaths. A couple of different cities, Los Angeles being one, have registered bubonic plague. It's utterly out of control. Vancouver is another city. Portland, Seattle, San Francisco and Oakland, Los Angeles, Houston, Denver. It used to just be warm weather cities. Now it's not. It's cold weather cities as well. People die of exposure. There's massive abuse and there's slavery. It's pretty much scrubbed from the media. There's very little coverage, and what you do see frames it as an anomaly of some sort. And gee, look how unusual. There's 17 miles of homeless camps here in Orange County, California. How unusual. No, those exist in every state in the country. Hawaii has them now too. I mean, they're everywhere. But it's any discussion you see on the nightly news, on 60 Minutes, on any of these moronic corporate legacy media, political broadcasts, you will not hear this discussed.
Of course not.
They will not touch it. They will talk about, did Nikki Haley misstep when she said, fuck off. You have to be brain dead to take any of this seriously, honestly.
Or they tell you the economy is soaring. Look at the jobs market. Everything is fine. This is the strongest we've ever been, which is just on your point. In Europe, when the bubonic plague wiped out something like 70% of people here, our ancestors tossed their potty on the street and we drank from a well. Okay, so those were in Christian medieval Europe. That's when this thing first breaks. So imagine this is modern America, where this is happening. And to me, what's staggering is how similar Europe is. Like shared sins of the past kind of come back to haunt us, because if anybody deserves bed bugs and rat infestations, it's France for what they've done in Africa, and also Belgium, Belgium has a serious drug problem as well, not as zombified as, you know, the streets of Philadelphia videos that we see, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just marveling at the symmetry, you know.
Well, the Belgium, interestingly, the Charleroi in Belgium was voted recently the ugliest city in the world.
Wow. I wouldn't imagine that.
And if you've ever been there, it's I mean, I've just passed through. It's just a massive mill town that gone to ruin, and you know, unemployment's 40%, and it's
who coined the term sacrifice zone? That was the popular leftist.
No, Naomi Klein. That's the shock doctrine. Who's the sacrifice zone?
He talked about Detroit, and you know, those are Camden, New Jersey. You know, the sacrifice zones of Western capital. So I did want to go way back to our discussion about Zionism. You know, John talked a bit. He was ostensibly in response to my point about this Zionist mindset, and I understand what John was saying, but I think he didn't really touch on this indoctrination that really exists within a lot of young people. And you know, they have the Aliyah where they go to Israel, and then they have the tours where they go to like Auschwitz and the Holocaust camps, and there really kind of are, you know, indoctrinated to see humanity as inherently anti-Jewish. There's a great documentary about this called Defamation. So you watch this. It's produced by some young Jews, and they kind of document how this indoctrination takes place, and they take video of the different trips that people do. Anyway, I think, and that's kind of what I believe Vladimir Goldstein was referring to when he talked about the mindset that we have to accept and work with. And how what a lot of the coverage is just reinforcing this belief within you know, a young Zionist and older Zionists in the state of Israel. And I'm not sure, John. I mean, John said a lot of great things, but he didn't really speak to that particular issue. I don't know if you want to, John.
Well, I far be it from me to suggest there's not indoctrination of young Israelis. The indoctrination is profound. And again, Miko Peled has been extraordinary. You should just visit his webpage, because there's a number of lectures and speeches and interviews. He's been really heroic in giving up his time and combating the disinformation. No, of course there's indoctrination. The change that occurred probably about 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, with the rise of settler culture in Israel, that the settlers and that the IDF essentially merged with settler militias, sort of cemented this indoctrination structure that kids have when they go to school. And it didn't used to quite be this bad, but now children, Zionist kids, are taught how to use guns. They take, you know, kindergarten trips to military bases. They learn how to, you know, get down in sniper poses, all of this stuff. Yes, of course, it's an intensely militarized, fetishized a culture that insists on Israel's right to exist, and everything else is anti-Semitism. I'm only saying that this is political more than it is religious.
Sure.
It's not the mindset that supposedly we have to accept, like not going to accept it, but that, or at least be aware of. Yeah, sure, they're indoctrinated. They understand all the mechanisms of deflection and sort of dealing with the trope of anti-Semitism. Anything that you say, you will be called an anti-Semite. They understand how all of that works. It is very cynical. I'm just saying, I think it's much more cynical. Even the deepest layer of this indoctrination is more cynical than it is religious. Maybe people like Ben-Gvir and his family believe it, but I'm not even sure of that. It's a strange mixture. It's a strange mentality that is both cynical and sincere. But I don't think that it's. I just don't think it's religious primarily.
There's a group on Twitter X you can follow. They're called Torah Judaism, and they are absolutely anti-Zionist, very, very faithful Jews. And they always speak up against the bloodshed, against the genocide and all that. So that already says, I think, dismisses the religious aspect.
But like I say, Miko Pellet.
Yeah.
He's very good.
Link to his website in the comment section. Guys, thank you. John, we made you really exercise your brain today, jumping back and forth from topic to topic. You did great. We really appreciate your
My pleasure.
insights. Ian, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Absolutely.
And Ben, thank you as well for being my co-host, as always. Anybody have any last words before we end the stream?
Just enjoy the Norwegian medicine, John. Get better from the flu.
Yes. I hope that I do. This was a nasty flu, boy. I'll tell you. Don't catch it.
Not COVID positive, John?
Yeah.
Was it COVID? Did you test for COVID?
No, but the school here has, in this district my twins go to, they're 7 years old. I think it was 300 kids, 290 kids attend the school. On Monday, 14 came to school. The rest were homesick.
Something is going around in Norway. So stay safe. Thank you for watching, guys. We'll be back next week. Thank you very much.